All right, deep divers, strap on your tanks. We're going in.
Sounds good to me. What are we diving into today?
Today, it's fins. But not just any fins. We're tackling the age-old debate split fins versus blade fins.
The classic showdown. Love it. It's one of those equipment choices that can really make a difference in your diving.
Right. And it seems like everyone's got a strong opinion on this one. So we're going to break down the why, the how, and maybe even help you figure out which fin belongs in your dive bag.
Music to my ears. I think a good starting point is really understanding how these fins work, how they interact with the water,
Okay, yeah, let's start there.
So split fins, with that gap down the middle, they're all about reducing resistance as you move through the water.
Like they're slicing through the water more cleanly.
Exactly. They almost cheat the water a bit, making your kicks more efficient.
Makes sense. I've always wondered, though, does that split actually change how it feels to fin?
It absolutely does. Divers often say split fins feel almost effortless, especially on those nice long dives. Less fatigue, less strain on your legs.
Interesting. So less work, more glide. Sounds perfect for a lazy reef dive.
You got it. In fact, some studies even suggest that using split fins can actually reduce your air consumption just from putting in less effort.
No way, really? How much are we talking?
Potentially up to 15% on longer dives just from that reduced effort.
Wow, 15%. That's not nothing.
Definitely something to consider.
Okay, so we've got the effortless glide of split fins, but what about when you need a little more, oomph in your fining? That's where blade fins come in, right?
You nailed it.
Yep.
Blade fins are like the workhorse of the fin world. Pure power and precision.
I like it. Power and precision.
Right. That solid blade translates to a much more direct push in the water.
So it's that classic trade-off, a little more effort for a more powerful stroke.
Exactly. And choosing between them really depends on what you're hoping to get out of your dive.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, it's not as simple as saying one is for beginners and one is for, more experienced divers.
You're absolutely right. It's way more nuanced than that. It comes down to your diving style, the conditions, what you're trying to achieve down there. A seasoned diver who loves those long, slow reef dives might absolutely love split fins,
Yeah, it makes total sense. Just because you've got hundreds of dives under your belt doesn't mean you want to work harder than you have to.
Exactly. It's about working smarter, not harder sometimes. And on the flip side, you might have a newer diver who's all about exploring wrecks, and they might find that the control and power of blade fins really suits them.
So it's about finding the right tool for the job, or the dive in this case. I like it.
Exactly.
It's funny, we talk about split fins being great for those long, leisurely dives, but you also mentioned wrecks and currents as being ideal for blade fins.
Right.
So where's the line? Can you use split fins in any current? Or are blade fins an absolute must-have in those situations?
That's a really good question, and one I hear a lot from divers, actually. And it kind of highlights how we tend to put these fins into very specific categories.
Yeah.
When, like most things in diving, it's not always so black and white, right?
Right.
Split fins, believe it or not, can handle moderate currents pretty darn well. It's all about understanding their limits.
So it's less about a hard no and more about efficiency then.
You got it. You hit the nail on the head. If you're fighting a really strong current, you're going to work a lot harder with those split fins than you would with blades.
Makes sense. It's like trying to, run into a headwind. You can still do it, but it's going to take a lot more energy.
Exactly. It's that extra effort, and when you're underwater, conserving energy is key.
Especially if you're on a longer dive, right? Or if you're going deeper.
Absolutely. The last thing you want is to be battling your fins when you're trying to, enjoy the underwater scenery.
For sure. Speaking of enjoying the scenery, I've heard some underwater photographers swear by split fins, even when they're not in perfectly calm conditions. Is there any truth to that?
Some underwater photographers, especially those who are really into macro photography, the small stuff, they actually value that, super precise, almost hovering movement that split fins can give them.
Oh, I see. They're not trying to cover a ton of distance. They're just making these small, controlled movements.
Exactly.
So even within underwater photography, the right fin can vary.
Absolutely. It's all about your individual needs and preferences.
Yeah.
And, this goes back to what we were saying earlier about some of the misconceptions around fins.
Yeah.
Like that whole split fins are for beginners thing.
Yeah, we got to bust that myth.
Right. It's just not true. I've seen experienced tech divers rocking split fins because they work for them.
Yeah.
So really, it's about finding that sweet spot between what you personally like, your diving style, and the environment you'll be diving in most often.
So if someone's listening to this and they're maybe thinking about trying a different type of fin, what advice would you give them to help them choose?
Well, I always say start by thinking about where you see yourself diving the most.
Hmm.
Are you drawn to calm, clear waters, or are you all about exploring shipwrecks and strong currents?
Right. And like you said before, what kind of diving gets you excited?
Exactly. Long, leisurely explorations or shorter, more agile dives. And then once you have a sense of those factors, think about your own physical needs and any, pre-existing conditions you might have. Split fins, for example, they tend to be a bit more forgiving on your joints, so they might be a good option if you have any knee or ankle issues. But it's always smart to chat with your doctor if you have any concerns.
Yeah, good point. Always better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely. And finally, don't be afraid to experiment.
Love it.
Rent or borrow a few different fin types, take them for a test drive in the pool.
Like test driving a car, you wouldn't buy it without driving it first.
Exactly. You want to see how they feel, how they move in the water, how they perform in different situations. That hands-on experience is really valuable.
Yeah, that's great advice. Try before you buy. It's gotta feel right.
At the end of the day, we want gear that makes us better divers, right? It all comes back to enhancing that experience, making the most of our time underwater.
For sure. And speaking of enhancing that experience, it sounds like choosing between split fins and blade fins isn't just about picking a side. It's more about,
It's like understanding yourself as a diver.
hmm,
What kind of diving do you love? Where do you dive? And honestly, how do you want to move through the water?
I like that. How do you want to move through the water?
Right. Do you want that effortless glide, almost like you're part of the current?
Hmm.
Or do you prefer that power, that control to navigate and explore every nook and cranny?
It's like two different approaches to experiencing the underwater world, and they're both amazing in their own way.
Exactly. That's what makes diving so cool. There's room for everyone. Whether you're all about the sleek elegance of split fins or you're drawn to that focused power of blade fins, it's about finding what lets you fully embrace the experience.
I love it. And you know what? This whole conversation has really opened my eyes to the nuances of fin choice. I feel like I've leveled up my fin game just by talking to you.
Glad to hear it. I think the biggest takeaway here is don't get caught up in the hype or those rules about which fin is for who.
Yeah, no more fin shaming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Experiment, try different things out, find what you love.
Couldn't agree more. And hey, listeners, we want to hear from you. What kind of fins are you rocking? Split fins, blade fins. Tell us why you love them. Hit us up on social media. Let's keep this fin chat going.
Absolutely. Always love to hear from our fellow divers.
And with that, I think it's time for us to surface from this deep dive into the world of split fins versus blade fins. Big thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us. Until next time.
Happy diving.
Dive safe, everyone.